turnout today. Such an important discussion that we're having. And are we recording this? Oh, there it is.
Here we are.
Welcome.
Eyes on Oregon. Is this episode 8, John?
This is episode 8.
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, we are so honored to have everyone here today, particularly our guests. We have with us in attendance Dr. Pilar Hernandez-Wolf, who is a psychologist and a professor of psychology at Lewis and Clark School, which is my alma mater, actually, where I got my law degree. Dr. Hernandez-Wolf teaches there. We have also with us Jyoti Ma. Jyoti Ma is a yogi and a classically trained yogi and the founder of the Temple of Consciousness in Ashland, Oregon, and she's been operating her organization, her spiritual organization, for I believe over 25 years now, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that. And we also have with us Jonathan Goldman, the Padrino of the Santo Daime chapter, that practices in Ashland, also the Church of the Holy Light of the Queen. And Jonathan was also a plaintiff in the 2008 lawsuit, Church of the Holy Light of the Queen versus Mukasey, in which the Santo Daime Church successfully sued the federal government for the right to use daime, which some people refer to as ayahuasca, in its religious ceremony. And their community has been practicing in Oregon for I believe around 25 years, but I'm sure he'll hear more about that as well. And so just want to, so the purpose of today's conversation, there's several of them. This is a really exciting time in Oregon for religious practice that involving the use of psychedelics or theogens, in part because we have two potential votes this upcoming week at the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board subcommittees. On Wednesday, March 2nd, from 3 to 5 Pacific, the Equity Subcommittee has on its agenda consideration of requirements for entheogenic psilocybin production and entheogenic psilocybin services under the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, discussion and possible vote on recommendations. The very next day, Thursday, March 3rd, from 4 to 6 Pacific, we have on the agenda discussion and votes on licensing and spiritual and religious use of psilocybin. So these are topics that haven't been largely addressed at the advisory board or its committees. There's been some discussion, mostly beginning early last month. And given the short timeline that the subcommittees have to make recommendations on these issues, I think there's kind of a last minute push here to try to make sure that the opportunity doesn't pass us by to protect sacred practice without addressing the issue and coming up with a kind of a game plan. So I will throw the link to that meeting in the chat, in the show notes here. So if people want to come and either observe or participate through public comment, there will be a way to do that. For those who aren't familiar with the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board process, usually 15 minutes is reserved at the end of each meeting for public comment. And the comments that I hear frequently from the board members are that they really appreciate hearing from the public because it really helps to understand kind of the issues that are important to folks. And there is a lot of expertise that is not, housed in the board or its committees. So they really do look to the public for guidance and expertise on various matters. And I believe that's particularly true with respect to a religious and entheogenic practice. So I want to invite everyone here in attendance today to attend those meetings, comment if you feel called or led to do so, and just voice your support. I think it's important that Oregon hears from us. And so that's what's coming up this week. And so for tonight, we're honored to have with us kind of a panel of religious practitioners who and others who are interested in kind of the religious use of psychedelics. And the hope here is that in advance of these votes, these can be somewhat complicated and topics, particularly with how to do this in a regulatory framework as opposed to kind of a case law framework, which is how religious use of psychedelics have been determined in the past, was through litigation and sometimes statute. It's never, to my knowledge, been done through a regulatory process. So Oregon's question here is somewhat novel. And so my thinking in planning this roundtable here was that these issues are really complex, and that in order for the board and its subcommittees to make nuanced and informed recommendations, we just want to create some space and opportunity to just kind of advance and further the discussion around entheogenic practice and why it's important and how it could look and be regulated under Oregon's program. So that's the first part of it. And then I want to also acknowledge that this conversation today is at least in part a continuation of my presentation to the licensing subcommittee on February 3rd. I ran out of time during that presentation. It was primarily addressed to the question of why Oregon needs to promote or at least protect sacred practice under Measure 109. But we ran out of time and didn't get into the details so much of how. So we will talk a little bit today. The agenda for today is basically kind of a quick overview of the proposed regulatory framework for protecting sacred practice. And then we're going to open it up to the panel, the roundtable panel here, for folks to kind of describe some aspects of their practice that may be informative to Oregon decision makers and others about just what entheogenic practice really is and why it's not something that we need to be necessarily afraid of, and why it's something that Oregon really ought to invite into its program here. So essentially, so I'll get kind of a quick overview of the particulars of the proposed framework for religious practice, and we'll open it up. And then we'll open it to a big question and answer near the end, probably at least a half hour, so that people, particularly with a special invitation to people who are in attendance today, who sit on rulemaking committees, that they can inquire and ask and really kind of wrestle with these questions in an open and frank way. So that's kind of the hope for tonight's event. So we will start with kind of the overview. So essentially, the proposal for entheogenic practitioner privileges and duties is an attempt to carve out the regulations that would provide the broadest maximum protection that would be available under Measure 109 for entheogenic practitioners. I think of Oregon Measure 109 as currently undergoing a reputational makeover. It was kind of sold to voters as psilocybin therapy, but there's nothing in the bill that actually would have it be therapy. And as this represents a sort of new healing modality, psychedelic healing modality that is largely spiritual in nature, the question is, what is the appropriate container, or containers plural, for that healing to be offered through? And spiritual community and religious community is the container that psychedelics have historically and traditionally been offered through community ritual and ceremony. And in a way, it only makes sense for Oregon to adopt that into its rulemaking, particularly where we expect lots of other states to follow suit in looking for the model. So the particulars of the proposal are several that I want to highlight, and this is intended to be a broad overview of it, and it is fairly complex and fairly lengthy. So if anybody has questions, please raise them as this goes on. But essentially, there's several.
Let's also give our guests, if there's any interest in comment before John goes into details, feel free to jump in and we can get back to that as well. We've got a few other folks joining us shortly as guests as well. So open invitation if there's anything to comment on so far, or we can have John dig into the details.
Yeah, and if you were scheduled to be a guest speaker and we've missed adding you into the panel, please, by all means, let us know. Oh, it looks like Hunt Priest is here now. Hunt Priest is an Episcopalian minister out of the Georgia area, and he's been doing some really interesting work in this space too. And it looks like we also have Nyanga joining us, who is part of an organization that is an Theogenic community, an interfaith, interdisciplinary community in Portland that uses magic mushrooms as its sacrament, as I believe how they refer to them. So thank you for being here with us. So the brief overview of the proposal is that it identifies several ways, several common aspects of religious practice that are used regularly by entheogenic communities, religious communities that use entheogens or psychedelics as either a religious sacrament or an adjunct to their sacred practice of the religious practice, to try to just provide additional flexibility so that they can conduct ceremonies and rituals and to do kind of their, practice their religion without undue and unnecessary interference from the Oregon government. So those aspects that have been identified are centered largely around products as well as service centers and peer support. So one of the key features of Measure 109 is that it has to happen on-site at a licensed facility. It can't be taken off-site, it has to be purchased and consumed and experienced at the facility. A person's not typically allowed to leave the site with it. That's written into the measure, and it's not really something that can be negotiated around, no matter how favorable Oregon rulemakers might be to entheogenic practice. Their hands are tied by the statute. So there are certain things like that that are hardwired into the measure. I call those the non-negotiables, because even if we had a very sympathetic set of rulemakers, there are certain things they can't do no matter what, unless we as Oregonians go back and either get another ballot initiative passed or another piece of legislation that amends the measure. These are the kind of firm parameters that we can't really work around. We have to work within. So one of those is that there has to be a facilitator present during all times that psilocybin is being taken. And the facilitator is not allowed to take psilocybin while serving as a facilitator. So the issue then is what does the facilitator do and how many facilitators must be present? It's anticipated that the general rules that will apply to most service centers and facilitators will require a fixed ratio of facilitators to clients. And that is expected to be one of the major price considerations for the entire measure. But the idea behind the proposal with respect to facilitators is that we want to allow spiritual and religious communities to self-regulate and to certify people within their own community to be able to work in a peer support, including harm reduction role, but not necessarily just limited to that, who are members of the community and are potentially on psilocybin during the experience or take psilocybin during the experience. So instead of having to have a fixed number of facilitators who are being paid, probably at least $40 an hour would be my guess. Is a guess I've heard. To have a high number of those where a community is well established, it's responsible, it's already its members are able to look out for one another. So we want to just give communities maximum flexibility with kind of providing their own peer support during ceremony. So there, by statute, must be at least one facilitator who's present. So the proposal would say we give entheogenic communities a number of factors that they should consider when determining how many facilitators to have. And assuming that they consider each of these factors, they're allowed to deviate from the ordinarily applicable facilitator to client ratio. So the factors that are in the proposal, it's the familiarity of the service center and the facilitators with the clients who are participating in the ceremony. It's the types of ceremonial activities that the groups intend to engage in. So there's some that could be riskier than others, so to speak. It's the group and its members' prior experience with psilocybin or other psychedelics that could also be a relevant consideration. The amount of cohesion or discord present within the group, if known to the facilitator or service center operator. The relevant experience of the clients who are providing peer support. So if if they're brand new to peer support, they may want to have, and there's not very many who are highly experienced in peer support roles. They may want to potentially have other facilitators around to help kind of fill in some of that space. Any other risk factors that are known or should be known to the operator or the facilitator. So it's kind of intended as a catch-all that they can deviate from the mandatory ratio or the generally applicable ratio within the parameters of the measure, provided that they think of the issues that could, the intent here is to basically require that before a decision gets made about how many facilitators are present, that the community really kind of consider those issues carefully and really do it and exercise that privilege responsibly. And assuming that they're done responsibly and that there's no sort of situational contraindications to reduce that facilitator ratio down to the bare minimum, it would be just that they'd be allowed to do that and have more autonomy over that aspect. So I saw Jonathan Goldman had his hand up. So yeah, Jonathan.
I just wanted to clarify something. It is in the measure that was voted that people facilitating psilocybin things cannot take the medicine. Is that true? That's in the law.
Yeah, that is.
That's not just something that the advisory board decided on. That actually is what people voted on. Is that true?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's what one of the non-negotiables. So there has to be at least one. And so the proposal says if the community can safely and responsibly do so, that they be allowed to have only one facilitator who's there and present, and that they be able to handle the rest of the peer support in-house. So I guess before moving on to other aspects of that, maybe we ought to open it to kind of the panel here and see if folks had kind of thoughts or kind of, as you think about facilitator to client ratios and ability of a community to keep its members safe during ritual or ceremony, kind of what issues come up for you all, and and I guess if Oregon, the rule makers in Oregon are listening to this, what would you want them to consider when drafting rules around this issue? Yeah, Jody.
Yeah, I would just say thank you so much, John, and it's really nice to meet everyone else here on the panel, and good evening to all of our guests, and happy Mahashivaratri to all yogis, yoginis, and practitioners of the Sanatana Dharma. There are 9 Hindu temples in Portland alone, and so tonight is a very special night for those practitioners. I think it's important to recognize the experience and skills of these ethnogenic practitioners who've been practicing for a long time. In our case, as you mentioned, our temple, Enlightened Life Temple, is 28 years this year. We're celebrating. It is a temple of consciousness. Most of these traditions have to do with consciousness. It's not strictly religious or science. I really believe consciousness is the intersection of spirituality and science. For myself, I study a lot of the neuroscience of psilocybin. So I would like that recognition certainly to be there. If you're talking about giving a set of practitioners privileges, then I wonder how does that relate to the idea of grandparenting people into the system? It seems rather, I've had some strong feedback on the training rules that they've created, the training program, and it's, pretty much a medical clinical model and pretty much designed for psychotherapists, basically. And, I've commented many times, I don't think it's broad enough. We need to encompass indigenous practice. We need to encompass entheogenic practice, religious, spiritual use. So this initiative is very, very important. And I do think that it is more equitable to recognize the experience of the entheogenic practitioners by offering grandparenting, as well as, some people may need the training. Maybe they're new to the whole entheogenic community and they need to get some kind of training. That'd be a great resource going forward. But for the people that are already practicing now, the tide is turning. Research came out last week from the Beckley Foundation highlighting that the mystical experience that happens during psilocybin administration is in fact the key to alleviating depression. It relieves depression. If people don't have that strength of mystical experience with psilocybin, then they have a weaker response in terms of recovering from their depression. So they were suggesting, the Beckley Foundation, in their recommendations following that piece of the study or analysis of that piece of the study, that they would be needing to look to spiritual leaders to bring them into psychiatry, to help them understand a spiritual framework, to help them learn how to enhance the mystical side, which for us, that's really all it is. And that's the thing that is healing. And I'm glad their studies are proving that we've been right all these years. And so for us to have some role to play, in providing that set and setting, when teaching that set and setting to the clinicians. The point was made in one of the entheogenic practitioner council meetings that psychotherapists, clinicians, counselors, and all of that have been practicing with psilocybin in research and with other kinds of things like ketamine and the MDMA trials and all of that. But they've been doing that about anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And the entheogenic practitioners just on this call alone, on this podcast alone, have, probably near to 100 years of experience. And so it makes sense to me. We're not experimenting, we're done. They're experimenting. They want to see how it works. They're finding out more every day. They're doing the research that's proving what we've been holding and knowing all these years. So I really believe grandparenting is something that needs to be looked at, not just for us, but for even the indigenous practitioners who want to come to Oregon, who want to have the opportunity to bring their culture. So many Americans are going to Central America and Mexico and South America and for these experiences. And many of those traditional practitioners would like to come here. And I think it's inappropriate for them to be required to take clinical training that doesn't apply to how they work or what they're doing. On the other hand, we have what turns out to be one of the magic ingredients of the success of the clinical studies. And I think it's a very timely conversation. I don't personally think that it's necessary. I mean, I like your proposal on should a peer support person take the psilocybin with the group and sort of be the facilitator who's able to move in that altered state of consciousness and guide from that altered state of consciousness, which many traditions do. And then to have a non-sacrament taking facilitator outside of the circle, but nearby and monitoring, that makes sense to me. It seems reasonable all around. It doesn't interfere with the group experience and the ability of one member of the group at least to have the skills and the spiritual development to be able to do that part of the journey with the group, and for someone else to be there just as a safety mechanism and to meet the requirements. I kind of like the way you wrote that piece, and I think it's doable. I don't want to speak for everyone, but for our rituals and ceremonies, it wouldn't be a big problem, because a lot of times what the facilitators or priests and priestesses do not partake, but they only give it to the the congregation. So, and then they support them it's very similar to, what's being imagined for the system here. I like that piece of it. There's a few other places I might, comment again later, but I'd like to hear what everyone else thinks on that peer support idea or the whole proposal in general. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. And I don't necessarily assume that everybody who's on this panel has read the proposal in the same depth that you may have. So we want to invite people to kind of comment if they haven't read the proposal and aren't as familiar with the kind of minutia of it, that they still be invited to speak to the issue of kind of an entheogenic community's ability to self-regulate safely. I think of what the concern from Oregon rulemakers is primarily throughout the whole rulemaking process, they're trying to weigh between safety on the one hand and then accessibility and affordability on the other. And I think the concern is that if they make this kind of more affordable, that's going to be less safe and people are going to get hurt, and that's going to be really bad. So I think as a community of entheogenic practitioners, I think probably there's a lot of experience and wisdom in this room to speak of how equipped and capable a sincere entheogenic community is to handle its own safety issues and to look after the well-being of its congregants or the community members. So if somebody wanted to had any thoughts on that.
I have a comment to share. Hi everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I'm glad we're doing this. I just want to start with saying that to me, there's a different set of rules and a point of departure when thinking about working with entheogens religiously, spiritually, and in an indigenous way compared to how it's done in the West in a clinical, sometimes very medical manner. And the rules are different. The logic is different. So trying to fit spiritual, religious, indigenous practice into the mold of the clinical medical Western model is very problematic, and it's not a good fit. When thinking about what happens, for example, in indigenous communities, the people who administer the medicine take the medicine. They take the medicine because it's a shared experience, because the helpers and the person who gives the medicine are very experienced doing this and are experienced in navigating the realms that people access with entheogens. So there is a reason for that. So it's actually not to be out of control. Let's say control is not the right word, but it's not to be out of control. It's actually to be more in control because you are in tune with what's going on. And you have the knowledge and experience to navigate what's going on. You create, let's say, an energetic container with everybody who is there. When that's not there, it creates a different kind of relationship, and it creates a different kind of mystical or healing experience. It's something else. So to me, I believe that the rules for churches and spiritual practitioners should be different because they should respond to the different logic and the different worldview that is embodied in these practices. So, yeah, leaders should be allowed to have the sacrament. And yeah, perhaps, I mean, I would be okay with having helpers who are not to be around and to help with anything. If necessary, like I've never seen that that's a need, but that would be okay. But it would not be, it's not the same if a religious or spiritual leader is not able to partake on the sacrament to generate that container with everybody.
Thank you, Pilar. Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
So I want to follow up on what both Jyoti and Pilar said. This is my framework for this. The medical model and the Western model is an intoxication model, right? People are being intoxicated and therefore they have to be guarded because something bad can happen when people get intoxicated, right? So somebody has to be there to what? Call 911 or administer, resuscitation. I don't know. We've been doing this here for 29 years. I did a rough calculation, which is not accurate. We've done at least 1,500 ceremonies. Of those 1,500 ceremonies, I've led well over 1,000 of them, my wife and I. In every one of those ceremonies, I have taken the medicine, not microdosing. We have never had anyone have to call 911 or be resuscitated or flipped out or jumped off a cliff or whatever it is that the intoxication model would have to guard against. Because the actual model is an alteration model, not an intoxication model, right? We are altered, but we are altered, as Pilar is saying, everybody is in that same space. And it's not just a space that is created by the medicine. It is a space that opens through the medicine. If you've never participated and you have no idea what I'm talking about, right? But we enter a common space that, as Pilar is saying, has its own ethic, its own rules, its own morality, its own perspective. You see? So if the law is that someone has to sit in another room watching Netflix while everybody else is in the ceremony, okay, it's ridiculous, but okay. And if it's going to make the people who are making the rules feel better, but the reality is that person is going to have nothing to do and shouldn't have anything to do, because look, in those, I'm making it up again, those 1,500 ceremonies, many people have gone through what we call in the Daini passages. And I'm sure everybody who has facilitated anything, people go through passages. You confront very, very deep material in yourself, in your family line, in the general energetic field of the earth. People who are sensitive go through very, very deep processes that from the intoxication model can look like they're flipping out, can look like they've taken too much of whatever it is and they're in trouble. But within the alteration model, we call it a navigation. That's the word it's in Portuguese, navegar. You move through the space confronting that material, which is the transformative material that a person then ends up in their transformation and in the realization of the disidentification with it. They reach a different state of consciousness that then it gets translated, can get translated afterwards as, well, their addiction was healed, their illness got better, blah, blah, blah. See? So I want to just give that window for everybody to look through. So the people who are making the rules, if you have to, by the law, have a certain thing, have a certain arrangement, what I would want is for us to join in the understanding that at least in this space of the spiritual transformative, as Jyoti was saying, the state of consciousness, right? There are, as Pilar is saying, it's a different window. So let's then navigate from that window, right? The only other thing that I'll say is about training, right? I can only speak for how we do it. People spend years in training as to how to help everybody taking the medicine, everybody in every Daini work, and there have been tens and tens of thousands, right? The Daini started in 1930. the same time that the peyote church started in the United States. In the tens of thousands of ceremonies, everybody takes the medicine. It's and it's not just a convenience, it's the rule. If anybody comes to a daime ceremony, by definition, they're going to enter into that state of consciousness, into that space, so that there is a unity of heart and a unity of intention and a unity of vibration, which is what allows the miracles to happen, which is what allows the realizations and the healings and the transformations to happen. You see what I mean? So it's a of course, I know you all know what I'm talking about, that there's a multi-layered happening, that a person who by definition is not supposed to be in that, they're going to have nothing to do. What are they're going to, right? But if it needs to be, it needs to be. But that shouldn't be the way that the thing is organized, right? That's an adjunct. Okay, we're going to do that, but let's create the agreement, not even the rules. Okay, the rules, but let's create an agreement that matches the reality of what that circle is, matches the reality of what these medicines really are for, right? Peyote, psilocybin, ayahuasca, who are cousins of each other. They're all cousins. Were not initially put on earth to help, the people of United States pay $5,000 for a session to cure their depression. That's not why those medicines were put on earth, right? One of the leaders of the daime, Padre Sebastião, said, when God put us on earth, she knew that it was going to be hard to be a human being. And so she gave us these plants to help us navigate through how difficult it was going to be being a human being. And he said, wouldn't we be foolish not to take advantage of them? So that's what I want to say. Thank you for listening. Amen.
Thank you, Jonathan. Wow. That touches on one of the concerns I've heard raised about the proposal so far, as I've been kind of discussing it and kind of promoting it. I've heard people say that this is, why would you try to bootstrap a religious freedom program into a medical program? And I think it's just about educating folks about what Measure 109 really is. It's not, I don't think I've ever heard anybody who knows Measure 109 very well refer to it as a medical program. It's really not even a therapeutic program in the sense of its psychotherapy. Measure 109 is a flexible framework that will allow, by its terms, conceivably a wide variety of different types of practice under the measure, including psychotherapy, including wellness spas, and also including in theogenic practice and religious community. I'd like to turn now to, I guess, Hunt Priest is with us, and Hunt is kind of on to my thinking, at the front lines of some really exciting work at the intersectionality of Christianity with psychedelics. And I kind of wonder, from your perspective, Reverend, where do you see how do you see Christianity interfacing or finding expression under Measure 109?
Oh, thanks, John. Thanks for having me. So I do live in Savannah, Georgia, but I lived in Seattle for 8 years and served the church there, an Episcopal church on Mercer Island. And when I lived there, I was allowed to be in a research study of religious professionals and psilocybin. And it was a clinical study, but in the midst of that study, I had two profound religious, sacramental Christian experiences. One of the Holy Spirit present in my body, healing me. And then the second one was sort of a deepening of my ordination at the feet of the universe was how I came to understand it. So I do have Northwest connections, although I don't sound like it, and I currently live in Savannah, Georgia. So it's really an honor to be here. Oregon is a wonderful place. Spent a lot of wonderful time in Oregon on vacation and other times. So all that to say, thank you for allowing me to be here as an interloper of sorts. And I am in a unique position, I guess. I left parish ministry about a year ago to start a nonprofit called Ligare, which is Latin for ligament or to bind. It's also the root word of religion, to bind the human and the divine, which is at its core, I think, what religion is. We've wandered from that, but I think at the core of religious practice is to bind human beings to the divine. I think that's a bit of what Jonathan's speaking about too, I think. So I think all the world's religious traditions have much to offer. The mystical and contemplative parts of the world's religious traditions, not the doctrine, not the rule-based part, but the contemplative and religious side of all the world's religious and spiritual traditions. Christianity has that, and I think that was what prepared me for a very big experience in the clinical study, was my own meditation practice, my own weekly attendance at Eucharist, my chanting, my reading of scripture, my service in the community. All the things that I think the contemplative tradition brings allowed me to have a very profound experience of this holy and a healing from pretty serious anxiety, which I was not as aware of until it was gone. So I think for Christians, let me speak to that because that's my language and my people. I think for us, we have to take seriously the healing modality of entheogens. The church has always cared about healing from the very beginning of Jesus's ministry as a healer up through building hospitals and training doctors. The healing ministry of the church has been important. And I think for us in mental health, end of life transition, addiction, we have to take it seriously. We will take it seriously. So that's one part of this. And so I think educating Christians about that so that there's no resistance or lower resistance, because like all of us, we've been told for 50 years that these sacred plants are dangerous and addictive and deadly. So we're undoing a lot in the Christian community. I want to be a part of that. And then I think also end of life transition. I think that's a pretty easy idea for even very traditional people to take, to understand that these plants and compounds make the end of life transition much easier. And then I think ultimately religious people having access so that we can deepen our own experience of God, have a mystical experience. Religion, if we're not taking mystical experiences seriously, then we really should shut our doors. And I think these sacred plants occasion mystical experiences. It's the mystical experiences that bring about the healing. And the world's religious traditions, all of them, have a lot to say about mystical experiences and about these non-ordinary states of consciousness. Christian and Jewish scripture are full of them. And I think all of scripture is an attempt to explain mystical experiences, actually. So the resurrection appearances of Jesus, stories in the Old Testament, all of it, an attempt to explain mystical experiences. So Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and all the other traditions, we have a story, we have experiences of mystical experiences, we have sacred containers. And I think all that we bring to this can help those who are interested in that make sense of the experiences they would have while using these sacred plants. So that was a lot, but I think ultimately what we bring, what the world's religious traditions bring, is this ancient understanding of mystical experiences, attempt to explain them. And I think what entheogens bring to the world's religious traditions is a reliable opportunity to have an experience of God, to occasion a mystical experience. So we're all learning. And I think this isn't new to Christianity. It feels like for a lot of people it is. I mean, in the 20th century, there have been several documented studies and experiences of Christians working with these sacred plants. And then in the ancient Near East and in Greece, there's documented use of sacred plants and entheogens in religious liturgies and sacraments. So
So I'm just gonna say one more thing to my brother there. I guess you don't know this. The Daime
No.
is a Gnostic, primitive Christian, syncretic
Yes, I know.
religion. You know that.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure
Thank
that
you.
you
Yeah, I'm
that-
sorry.
that-
No, thank you.
there are people doing exactly
know. I know.
what you're saying.
Right.
That's
No, exactly. Right there. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you for making that more explicit. But
That's
yes.
all.
Yeah, thanks. Exactly. Yeah. It's already happening.
You're very welcome anytime, anytime to come where we are.
Well,
Consider the heart and the invitation wide open. Okay.
thank you. I'll be in Oregon a lot, I think, in the next year or two. So thank you.
Yeah, won't we all? John, can you help us hear from the two folks we haven't heard yet from?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I was just about to call on Nyanga. Thank you for being with us. One of the things that I was really interested in learning more about your community and how how these issues affect your community is around the fact that your organization identifies itself as an interfaith, ecumenical, kind of non-sectarian kind of spiritual community that doesn't necessarily find like this is my understanding, and I'm very new to it, so maybe you can correct me and fill in some gaps. But how sacred practice need not necessarily be, what I think a lot of people traditionally identify as, religious, but it can be kind of like that. Not being religious doesn't mean you don't have a sense for the sacred and that you don't work within sacred realms. And so I just kind of like to hear, I guess, with your community in particular that uses, it's my understanding, psilocybin, kind of how that, how kind of your organization or your community works with these plants or these fungi, and how that could, find expression in Oregon.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Give thanks for this opportunity to share, be in community. Thank you for creating this platform. Yeah, we're a spiritual family, and our utilization of fungi, plant medicines is just like the cherry on top of what we do. For us, it's restoring our sense of like connection to the spirit beings that we are, connecting to nature, to use that as a learning tool on how to better navigate this earth plane, and also connect to the Most High, our higher power. And so we do that through our triune of self-discipline, self-study, and self-love. And from there, we navigate with love. We approach everything with love. And we use psilocybin as our way of spiritual exploration. And from there, we do a lot of like educating, like our community, folks that look like me, so that, fungi, plant medicines don't have that like stigmatism to it. And our purpose is like to create access to these medicines. And so I just seen a survey today around 4,000 people that showed interest in the Oregon psilocybin measure 109 facilitator, manufacturer, and all that. Out of the 4,000 people who took the survey, only like 19 African American Black folks said that they had any interest in what was going on. And so for me, there's like a big need for our community to be able to have the space and the safety to do what we do. Like, it's a part of our lifestyle. We don't take it as like something that's gonna like help us get over our mental situation at the time or get over some hump. It's something that actually like, it's like an extra boost to like what we already do, to our lifestyles, how we live, how we operate as a family, how we navigate community as a family, how we choose and how we show reciprocity on who comes into our family. And so, yeah, that's something big for us, is just being able to like educate and provide spaces like this just like you are providing, so that yeah, more folks that look like me could have that that medicine be delivered to them in a way that doesn't seem so like clinical or medical, because this medicine has been on earth since it's the first. You know, you got water, then you got fungi, and you got plants. And so yeah, we feel like it's very important for us to be able to just be the light, not intentionally, but just, you know, just the way we live, and yeah, introduce this medicine to people who are interested. To all, you could be interested, you can't be interested. We just want to introduce it to you, educate about it, break down stigmas, create access, and then the choice is yours. We believe choice equals freedom. And so we're all about providing people with enough education to make an informed choice on how they want to proceed and, you know, tap into their own version of spirituality.
Thank you, Nyaga. Wow. Yeah, I was also deeply troubled by the low response from African-American community, just how underrepresented they are already forecasted to be within Measure 109, and how that's deeply troubling, particularly where a state like Oregon has set a goal of ending health inequity by 2050. And I don't think they can end health inequity if this doesn't draw in marginalized communities, just period. And I think one of the main barriers to, I mean, there's multiple barriers and to that, but one of those, of course, is finances. And one of the things about the proposal that I think is really critical to increasing equity within Measure 109 is that under what I think is typically understood as the therapeutic model, you have this really expensive service center that probably costs at least $250,000, maybe $500,000 or more to open on the low end. On the cheap end, you're talking that kind of resource investment. And then there's a facilitator who's trained and licensed, and so there's this very top down, and the facilitator, you know, or the service center offers, you know, the psilocybin to a client, and it just feels like this really, at the end of the day, big money is kind of backing it. And the idea of the proposal is that it really creates a more community container where spiritual and religious communities are able to provide their own sacrament and kind of handle it in ways that are appropriate according to their values and beliefs. And it also creates just a low cost way for communities to kind of work with these medicines. I've actually heard my friend Lakshmi over at awaken.net has offered that within her web platform, they are willing to do crowdfunded projects within Measure 109. So I think of that being kind of a tremendous opportunity for communities to come together and just really fund and create and you know, do that. So I think having a crowdfund psilocybin center would be kind of a, you know, particularly if it's a community model, is just really would I think draw a lot more people into the program than is otherwise forecasted to be kind of included in it. So yeah, that's really critical. I want to turn now to Nicole Howell. I have to apologize to Nicole. I think I may have accidentally sent her the wrong link.
It's all good. I'm here.
Scrambling.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, so Nicole is a lawyer with Clark Howell and a partner there, and has worked, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, but you're one of the co-founders of the Psychedelic Bar Association.
That's
and
right.
You also sit on the board of directors for North Star, that does the North Star Ethics Pledge that many of you may be familiar with.
That's right.
Yeah, so thank you for being here, Nicole. I'm curious to hear your take as a lawyer who works in this space of kind of the challenges that entheogenic communities have in terms of operating kind of above ground, like what kind of process. If Oregon does nothing here to draw special protections for religious practice in an affordable and equitable way, and the only feasible alternative for practitioners who use psilocybin religiously is to do it underground. Kind of what are the barriers outside of Measure 109 for a practitioner to come above ground, I guess is the question I'd like to.
Sure. And I want to answer that question. First, I also want to say, just as a general concept, kind of and John invited me to be here as a lawyer. I appreciate being here with all of these spiritual practitioners. It's lovely just to be in your community. As John mentioned, work with a group of lawyers that have started an organization to help lawyering be more psychedelic. And specifically what I mean by that in a word is to start within, which is what the North Star Pledge asks us to do and what we ask and invite lawyers to do as they seek to represent clients and businesses and churches in this space. And what we really mean by that is to see what is it that inspires us to be here. And if it happens to be an experience with psychedelic sacraments or practice, well, that perspective shift has tremendous ramifications for how we bring these things to market, and we don't allow ourselves to be lulled into we're just neutral actors as lawyers, and that we should do and can and must do whatever our clients who hire us and pay us money tell us to do, but that we actually have an ethical obligation to make sure that those regulatory frameworks and those business models are actually embodying the wisdom that interacting with psychedelics brings us, which is ultimately our unity with one another. So that's sort of my perspective as a lawyer and as a human being who practices law. That's really how I have come to identify myself, especially working in this space, but in general. And so there are so many things about John's proposal that are important, and I want to just kind of highlight a couple of them. One, John is the ultimate example of what we are trying to create as a psychedelic lawyer, seeing the truth of his experience and how that needs to show up in the law. And we have this brand new regulatory framework that some very smart people put together and the voters in Oregon decided to support, but it's not going to be perfect, right? And so seeing John's courage and really embodying his truth and his experience to say, no, this is something that needs to be recognized in the law, I think in and of itself is something that really needs to be recognized and applauded and encouraged in every one of these decriminalization measures or legalization measures, to borrow a phrase, if you see something missing, say something, right? Like we really need everyone to sort of step up and say, okay, this looks good, but it could look better. And here's the truth that we want it to embody. And in particular, I want to point out a couple things that I think the measure does that will have ramifications, like reverberations, both in Oregon and beyond, which is, first of all, just the idea that Theogenic, and what does that mean? A lot of people probably don't know what that means. They'll figure out what it means as they evaluate, this law that Oregon is putting into place. And, I've been thinking, as you all have been speaking, if this were to pass, right, and now we have this entheogenic facilitator system that sits alongside the regular adult facilitated practice, because of what we all know, right, when individuals participate in ceremony and have this experience with psilocybin, it has an entheogenic effect. Wouldn't it be cool to see sort of like the marketplace support more and more of the entheogenic facilitators and fewer of the non-entheogenic practitioners? I think it would be very interesting to see if these options were presented, kind of which direction we go on mass. I think would be pretty interesting. The lower cost of it, kind of overall and sort of democratizing the process, I think is of course a really key component. I could go on for the whole rest of the time about how we need to have public benefit or steward capitalist type business models. That's not the time. I won't go into all that. But the underpinnings of what John's regulations propose really help to support those kinds of ideas. And then finally, this requirement of a reciprocal exchange program, where both practitioners and the facilitators have to participate in a reciprocal exchange program that recognizes the reciprocity that is owed to Indigenous communities. We need it in the regular facilitator model in Oregon. We need it in every single law that's going to bring these to commercialization. But having those in there, I can't emphasize enough that even if this doesn't end up being successful this time around, and I very much hope that it does, and for all of those on the OHA who have decision-making authority, I really hope that you will seriously consider it. But if it doesn't, I really want to emphasize how important it is that we be setting the tone for these conversations, because we're at the very beginning of all of this. And we're all really just along for the ride of what psychedelics are sort of moving through us as we are in this period of time. So I'm going to take a breath, and then I'm going to answer your question. Which was, if we don't have specific protection for entheogenic practice, what are the ramifications for individuals who do exercise, who are in a spiritual or religious community? And as Jonathan well knows, I saw the great interview that you did with these folks on psychedelics today. I learned a tremendous amount. I actually live in Mount Shasta. I've been wanting to get up to see you in Ashland when you open up to public practice again. And so really, in a word, we're subject to the Controlled Substances Act and the DEA investigating and arresting and confiscating sacrament, and putting people in jail or for a day or two or whatever happens to be, or longer, and then really putting them through the very expensive court process of defending themselves. There's on paper a path to applying for an exemption with the DEA. It's a fruitless exercise that no one should embark upon. So the other option is, taking the risk, having medicine confiscated, which I think you mentioned before, that there have been lots of seizures, and there are attorneys working on trying to get information from the government around that, but we can all imagine what that's like. So the option there is to risk risk criminal prosecution, risk your freedom, and then have in mind and work with attorneys and have your documentation set up to try to afford yourself the protections that do exist under the law that we have because of the one of Jonathan's case and the UDB case. So it's not, the answer is not really that great without these protections in the regulation. So I've been talking for a long time, and I will I'll pause now. But if you have any follow-ups to that, if you wanted me to specifically address any other issues with it, I certainly will.
Well, when you mentioned the DEA process, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I just want to weigh in a little bit on what she said. I know that people have framed this differently, right? I know people consider themselves spiritual and not religious, and okay, but this is our path. This is your path, right? Everyone on this call, that you are committed, if you frame it that it's your heart calling, or it's God calling, or it's the goddess, or it's your soul, or your, you know what I mean? So when I was arrested, and the U.S. attorney told me that he wasn't going to prosecute me, but if he ever heard again that I was bringing this tea in or doing a ceremony, he was coming to get me. That's what he said. And I thought, okay, let's see what's going to happen. That's my path, right? It's my religion. I consider this my religion. But so it may very well be that some people are going to have to do this anyway. The advantage, though, is because the holding space in Oregon is a law that actually makes what you're doing legal, right? You're asking for a nuance. You're saying, hey, so the use of psilocybin was made legal, and we're saying this is just an expression of the intention of that law. What we had to do was we had to come up against, right, the government that said, you know, this tiny amount of what is in your tea is a Schedule I substance. Therefore, you are absolutely refused to, you know what I mean? So we had to do a thing, I think, against something that was more locked than the Oregon situation, I think gives, you know, and Nicole, you'd have to weigh in on that, but I think you at least have a holding space of that the thing is basically legal. And if they say, if this committee says, no, we can't do it, you're saying, well, we need an improvement on what is, and maybe we have to go to court to do that. So I actually think it would be very optimistic. I think the whole thing is optimistic, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, thank you. I do too. And I think in a way, this is a strange conversation to be having because, you know, and I think in the history of psychedelics and the legalization of them in the United States, I say religion got there before therapy got there. And there's a reason for that. You know, there's a reason why we have extensive litigation for religious practitioners and, you know, multiple cases at federal appellate court levels. But I've only heard recently of very few, like, thank you, Kathleen Tucker and Emerge Law Group for your right to try litigation. But, you know, there's the idea of litigating and a legal right to kind of a therapeutic use of psilocybin is really a very recent concept, whereas a religious right to do it really dates back for as long as we've known about psychedelics, really. And so it's kind of, as Oregon's program isn't medical and it's not even per se therapeutic, it also could include adult use or recreational psilocybin. It's like if there are people who are taking this with absolute, you know, sincerity and are taking this not just as a fun thing to do or just like a nice, just to have a good day, but to have kind of a divine encounter or something that's just really kind of revelatory. Why wouldn't we kind of recognize that that is the long-standing existing use that has already kind of been established, you know, clearly in case law, you know, within our nation. So to me, it only makes sense if we're going to have like a recreational program. Why wouldn't we give special rights and privileges to religious operators who work under the same program? It's just kind of, to my thinking, kind of just a no-brainer. But you know, this conversations. This matter is far from over yet. This is definitely not guaranteed that this law will pass. And I appreciate very much, Nicole, your comments that this is, even just to have this conversation is in itself kind of an achievement that we've gotten this far. And, you know, we've come to kind of describe what it is we do and why it is that that's not a thing that people should be afraid of necessarily. I think the thing that I really want to impress upon Oregon rulemakers as they're weighing through these issues is that these communities are already safely doing this and have been doing it safely long before there was an Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, long before there was a state of Oregon or a nation of the United States. Long, you know, this stuff predates all of us, large by thousands of years, and to then kind of artificially say this can only happen in a top-down therapeutic model is just kind of it's just kind of ludicrous. So that's my spiel here. Yeah, Jody.
You know, it's just such an amazing experience to be able to sit with so many experienced practitioners and people that have, you know, been doing this for a long time and have a passion for the spiritual path of awakening and consciousness and the benefit of mystical experience. I just wanted to add a little bit that, you know, in the beginning, I was a psychotherapist, a counselor, licensed counselor, running a trauma center with a focus on treating traumatic stress and addiction. I had wanted to become a therapist because of the early research on LSD and the cure rates for alcoholism, and the reports about psychedelics and the potential for helping people heal. And then it was made illegal, you know, before I finished my study and got to the point of having a practice. But I never forgot about it. And you know, over the years, some of my clients, who were probably in the thousands, did experiment, and they did have vastly different outcomes in their treatment because they were desperate and looking for something else because the treatment wasn't helping. We have that situation right now with alcohol addiction, opioid addiction, meth addiction. The overdose rates are, you know, every year going up so extreme. And it was way back when the big book came out, when AA was founded in the 1950s, when Bill W., the founder of AA, said, without a spiritual experience, you won't get free of it. That it requires, it's in the big book, they follow the big book in AA, they must have a spiritual experience. It's the only thing that will stop it, because that's what they were witnessing. And he himself had a spiritual experience. And then later in the 60s, he would go on to experiment with LSD, in which he had his burst of light experience and realized, I am not an alcoholic anymore. I'm not that, you know. He had the great realization, we call it, you know, who the self really is, who's going through these experiences. It's not, don't identify, you know, so much with what's happening to you. Find out who you really are. And that has been the standard in alcohol treatment, that people have to have spiritual experience. Of course, you know, the systems they came up with to try to make that happen are awkward and outdated, and they're not effective. AA runs between a 5% and 35% success rate, which is really a massive failure rate. Addiction treatment center, same thing. You know, the revolving door in and out of treatment, relapse happening constantly. But you know, now on the other side, being a mystical practitioner, leaving the clinical world and really coming into the realm of consciousness, the real source of everything, you know, forget the neuroses and everything else. If you get that, that's the cure. And so the seeing where we're at with this initiative and with the process. And now this other report coming out last week from the Beckley Foundation saying, oh gosh, you know, the mystical experience is what makes the depression go away. And we could have told them that. We all could have told them that. But thank God they have the research now. They've proven it. And I can only hope that they continue to explore the vast amount of clinical mention and research and the work of Carl Jung and all the studies on consciousness and all the teachings of the great philosophers of consciousness. It doesn't have to be religious, or, you know, we don't have to call it spiritual. We know now it's a neurological effect. When the brain changes, we have an enlightenment experience, or when we have an enlightenment experience, the brain changes. And when the brain changes, we become the real self, and we experience happiness and bliss and centeredness and peace and unity, and the suffering stops. So with us holding this knowledge base and that intersection, you know, of the early leaders in addiction, trying to get rid of addiction, you know, which is such a hard issue because it's an entrenched brain disorder. But now we have the way forward. And I think entheogenic practice is vital. They're talking about bringing people in to train psychiatry, how to incorporate spirituality. Good luck. You know, first of all, we have to get out of the sterile room with the white coats and go out in nature and get some of the sun and the sky and each other. And, you know, I having facilitated a lot of experiences over the past 35 years, I'm really curious to see how they're going to train therapists to handle some of the natural things that awaken when people are, in that liberated state of consciousness. I know how we handle it, but I don't know how they're going to handle it. And I think we can help them. And I hope that they'll open the door and just say, hey, there's a lot of people that have experience and knowledge and wisdom, and we should give them that grandmothering, that grandparenting, grandfathering, bring us in and let us show you what we've been holding on to all these years.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. I want to come back to something that Nicole had said earlier about this project, which is that, I mean, this is kind of, everyone knows this, but Oregon is the first place to do this. And I really am really concerned that if kind of spiritual practice isn't protected under Measure 109, that all the other states that follow, I mean, will follow Oregon's example of kind of relegating spiritual and religious use to the sidelines, and having it be, we just had I think probably many of you are aware of the article that just came out in Vice about conflicts of interest at the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, and in my earlier presentation to the board at the licensing subcommittee in early February. There's a long list. I think it's probably over 30 companies now that are publicly traded who work in psychedelics and that are kind of solely focused on psychedelics. And none of this is even really legal yet. And there's already $4.8 billion of industry around something that's not even legal yet. And as time goes on and the Oregon model gets exported to more and more places, I think it's just inevitable that this thing that I'm kind of calling the psychedelics industrial complex is going to become more and more entrenched, and it's going to make it harder and harder to have these low-cost pathways to service that are really, devoid of profit motive and are dedicated to just helping and healing people and giving them kind of spiritual experience. I think when the intersection between money and psychedelics is one that I think many of us just have a great kind of misgiving around on some level. And I think by allowing and Theogenic practitioners to have kind of their program and their community that keeps as much money out of it as they want to. It's not saying that they can't bring money into it, but I think by protecting sacred practice, we really set up a safeguard against kind of corporate takeover of psychedelics. And I think it's, Oregon's example here is going to have ripple effects beyond, I think, what anybody really realizes. And I'm just highly concerned that even within Oregon, a small state of only 4.6 million people, we're already seeing these conflicts of interest problems kind of arise and potentially even corrupt the process. So, when you add to that, like a much bigger state, like once California comes on, there's a lot more money in California. I mean, there's plenty of money in Oregon for sure to corrupt things, but just as this sector or this landscape of psychedelic healing gets bigger and bigger and more players added to it, I just think we have to carve out space for sacred practice to make sure that it doesn't just get subsumed into profit motive. So that's one of the things that really concerns me the most about this. Like, not only do we need to protect spiritual practice, but spiritual practice hangs in like this delicate state right now, as I see it, where we're seeing aggressive tactics from some of these companies that are trying to patent things like holding hands and using soft furniture and gentle lighting and relaxing music in psilocybin sessions, and it's just, what does that bode for our future unless we take some kind of action to, now to show that, this is a people's medicine. Just like Measure 109 is a people's law that was passed not by legislators, it was passed by a vote of the people. So I think, my call is, we as people have to stand up and say that this is not the psychedelic program that we want. This is not the one that we want to, we can do better, plainly. And I think, to my thinking, that starts with protecting sacred practice. And then, and then on the therapy side, if they want to have it highly regulated with, I just think that the problem here is that I think the people on the board I was talking to someone on this panel recently who said that everyone on the board has advanced degrees in psychology or medicine, I think, with very few exceptions. I think that's like maybe one or two people who don't. And so people who have those professional backgrounds and biases are the ones that are writing the rules. So I think we just have to kind of tip the scales and show that there's a lot of ways this can be done. And a lot of, and that many of those ways, in fact, the ways that we are promoting here are safe and beneficial. And that this is just how we have to do it. So who wants to go next?
I want to just add to what you're saying, John, that also speaks to the part of your proposal that the people responsible for training people are the people, right? In other words, I can't imagine a scenario where, and it's not going to happen to us, but I can't imagine any of you all doing this, where these people on the board are going to decide who's to train your people to come and be in your ceremonies. To do what? So I think that it also speaks well to that. And I'm thinking, and I imagine, you're a lawyer, you got lawyers, you're thinking this too. Everything you're doing now is to show that you have done your diligence. You are showing that it's safe. You're showing how it's safe. You're showing how it's done, so that in that unfortunate but possible eventuality that you have to go and demonstrate that to a court, you've done your diligence. That's what we did when we got to court, right? We're about to celebrate, by the way, in April, 13 years from when we liberated our practice. Yeah. And when we went, we had to show we took care of the sacrament. We took care of people. We took care of our money. And we were part of a lineage. Those were the four things that we had to show. We had a history. We knew what we were doing. We had taken care of it for years, right? And we were way more interested in a lack of diversion than the government was, right? Those were the four things that we had to show. And we had done it by years of documentation, right? We went to court in 2009, and we had been operating since 1993 with paperwork, who came and how we did it and how many times we did it. We had documented all that for those decades because we knew that eventually we were going to have to go and show that to somebody.
John, I just want to add another comment. I want to second everything you said. I completely agree. That's also one of my biggest worries. And this there's also a dimension of equity, and I'm going to bring this up simply because there is an equity subcommittee that is supposed to inform this whole process. And initially, and this I think continues to be the spirit of those who created the advisory board, the equity subcommittee is supposed to link with all other subcommittees and sort of bring the perspective of equity to everything that is being done within the, that clinical framework. But one of the dimensions of equity that has been missed in the discussion is the equity around religiosity and spirituality. It's just have been absent from the discussion, and we have to bring it in now, like in the next week or two, because otherwise it's going to be too late. So that's one point. The other one is that since this, to me, this is more about advocating for diversity in terms of how to practice religion and really protecting religious freedom. Working with psilocybin doesn't have the form of a church necessarily. People can make churches, but how each of one is going to practice with it is going to be different. And I think that diversity should be protected. We have different lineages, we have different connections with different groups of people in different parts of the world. That needs to be protected. And it also, there needs to be protection for what's emerging that is new. We also have a right to create spiritual practices here and now for those who are inhabiting this planet right now. So we need to protect our right to do that. We can't have these venture capitalists invading this aspect of our lives. I mean, that's corrupt to me. So I'm wondering, I mean, and since, as you have said, there are so many conflicts of interest. And to me, you know, the sad part about this is that the conflicts of interest are kind of there and they get away with it. It's like now nobody's doing anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if one says this is a conflict of interest, if one says, what's the problem with this? Nobody wants to talk about it and they just, you know, things keep as if it's not there. So I am thinking in terms of advocacies. I think it's necessary that not only, you know, that this proposal, like you said, is presented to the licensing board and the equity subcommittee, I'm sorry, the licensing subcommittee and the equity subcommittee, but also that the people who are here and who care about this also perhaps write to the OHA and, you know, in support of this proposal. And, you know, also with concern about what's going on. It's not, I don't think at this point it's enough to do it at the subcommittee level. I think there has to be a stronger voice and different voices coming from different places.
Thank you so much, Pilar. That reminds me of I've talked to a lot of people about the proposal, and one of the things I've heard pushback on is that it doesn't go far enough, in part because of the constraints imposed by the measure itself. And to that, I respond that I think clearly some kind of screening process needs to happen, and I don't think that the proposal would avoid screening or would result in unsafe screening or anything like that. I think if anything, spiritual communities, because this is spiritual practice, they may take it more even serious than somebody who's doing it for a different type of practice. But that might be my personal bias, but I think that this is really, I think sincere spiritual practitioners who operate under the measure are not going to need their hands held and told how to look after client safety largely. I think they're going to do that on their own because that's just what they're going to do. And it's what they're already doing. And so I just think that the state really ought to invite those people who are practicing with psilocybin in a respectful and sincere and theogenic kind of spiritual or religious way, invite that use into the program so that there can actually be more safeguards added in place. I think that there's a lot of danger in underground practice. For those who've been following the podcast cover story, they're going into shocking detail for a lot of people about some of the perils of underground practice and how people get abused. There's, if we invite in theogenic practice above ground within the context of Measure 109, it provides robust oversight and accountability. People will still have to probably pay a significant amount of money for licensure to get their service center or their manufacturing operation up and running. And to lose that permanently because they behave irresponsible is a significant detriment. It's a significant disincentive, and I think it's probably just enough. I mean, I don't even think you'd need a disincentive other than like people getting harmed. I think these communities are looking after their community members, but I think there's just a concern that if we don't regulate it enough or tightly enough, that people are gonna it's gonna result in harm all over the place. And I just haven't really, in all of my kind of travels in this area with meeting people, I just find them, like everyone on this panel today, just like sincere, good people who, want the best and want, their communities to have, profound, life-changing experiences. So I think, does anybody have any closing thoughts before we switch gears to public question and answer?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute to just kind of address the couple points about, when we say venture capital and we say corporate takeover, what we really mean by those things is that we don't want profit only, profit first, exponential return on investment in a short period of time models for psychedelic therapy and theogenic practice, whatever we want to call it. That's really what we're all pointing to. And I just want to emphasize the point that the way that we do that is to require in every decriminalization law, every law that purports to legalize or regulate, but even decriminalize. And I have to emphasize the point about decriminalize, because even though a law is not set to regulate and set up a regulatory and licensing framework, we need to be saying, even in those laws that liberalize possession, we need to be saying, in the future, when we have these business models, they must have public benefits as a requirement, and or they must be in a measure stewarding the practices, the communities, the stakeholders from which this knowledge comes, from which this wisdom comes, but also that are already being impacted, right? These are just the externalities that we ignore in an extractive capitalist model, but those really need to be recognized and emphasized. And this is the last thing I'll say, but I know you want to get to questions, but there are efforts underway to create a sort of a scorecard where businesses that want to get into the business of commercializing psychedelics need to meet a certain rubric that addresses environmental, social, indigenous reciprocity, and really is a net positive on society, and not one that just extracts for the benefit of those high net worth individuals that contributed capital to the beginning, to the enterprise at the beginning. And so I hope that all who are listening here really see that as a call to action, that in every state and in every law that we move forward with from this point forward, there have to be these requirements that the business models reflect the wisdom that we know is true from our experience with psychedelics and why they're actually, why they work. I love, Jyoti, when you said, yeah, the depression goes away because of the spiritual experience. Like, yeah, we all know that's true. And so if that's true, then let's do this differently as we, bring them to mass market. And then the last sort of just a last little point there in terms of, I just perused quickly the conflicts of interest article that somebody put up. And, in a word, if the business models were set up in a way where those who had voting were not those who had the economic interest, but that your economic interest was sort of separated out, and those who are stewarding the actual public benefit of the company are the only ones who get to vote and don't have economic rights. This is the whole revolutionary concept of purpose economy and what they're really, how they're trying to change, really to change the face of our economy and the way that businesses operate. That would address many of these conflict of interest rules. You don't get to vote if you have an economic right, or your economic rights are balanced with reinvestment in the public benefit. So there are lots of ways of addressing the issues that you're all speaking to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and I don't mean to suggest that all companies who do business for profit in the psychedelic ecosystem are like heinous, horrible people or anything like that. I think it's just kind of, in some ways, a few bad apples, like often happens. It kind of give the whole, many folks a bad name. And I think there's plenty of really great companies that are doing this in an ethical way with a eye towards kind of this industry being equitable, for decades to come. But it's just
Yeah.
like, how do we?
It's not, yeah, and it's really not about demonizing anyone. I mean, the fact of the matter is that whether it really isn't that there's, this like cobble of big money getting together in rooms, although that does happen, to be talking about like, how are we going to take this all over? It's not really that coordinated. It's just that all of the incentives and the structures that already exist about how corporations operate, about how corporate law functions, like they all just sort of funnel businesses into this status quo way of operating. And so unless we change those structures, we're going to end up with the same results over and over again, whether we intend to or not, and whether the people who start the businesses are well-intentioned or not. There's a great, if you go to, we call it Paula, is a great kind of dystopian narrative that walks through exactly the very well-intentioned psychedelic facilitator who starts her own tiny clinic, and how she ends up at the end after taking on a bunch of venture capital money, where the mission of the organization ends up at the end, and how very distraught this, the character in this story is. So it's not about bad or good people. It's about bad extractive models.
Yeah. I agree 100%. Okay, with that, I think we might switch gears here to public questions. So we have a question from Jonathan Mink. What are the regulations on ceremonies concerning groups, patient to practitioner, one-on-one only? So I think I can answer that one. Essentially, there's been a recommendation from the licensing subcommittee that group. So first off, it's presumed that I should say, that group sessions will be allowed. There was a full board recommendation back in, I believe, late November about having group training be required for all facilitators who go through the program. And so that passed unanimously by the board, and everyone seemed to be in agreement that if they're going to train it, then we assume that they'll allow it. But that, I guess, technically that's not fully decided yet. Then, so the question is how many facilitators will have to be there. And, I think that currently OHA is inclined to want to turn it into a fixed ratio, meaning that I think the earlier recommendation was that for every 3 clients, there'd have to be 1 facilitator, which is a lot. And I think there was an amendment of that recommendation months later that for regular dosing, non-microdosing sessions, that it be a ratio of 8 to 1, which provides more flexibility. And I want to emphasize that doesn't mean that every group should always use 8 to 1. 8 to 1 might not make sense for a lot of people or a lot of reasons. But within this context, within the Theogenic practitioner context, it gives communities the ability to kind of navigate that with a little more flexibility. And then with the microdosing, they have it as 10 to 1 as the recommendation. And that's just from the licensing subcommittee. And those issues haven't actually been picked up by the full board yet, although I'm sure we'll see some fireworks on that in the next 3 or 4 months as the board hastily kind of addresses all the loose ends that they need to wrap up on. There is a question from Guy.
It's like, what are you talking about, John? It's like daycare. 3-1. We have to make sure that, right?
Yeah, it's just like it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of money. And if people are paying $40 an hour, I mean, that's 100. Even if you spread that $40 an hour for 6 hours over 3 people, that's still a lot of money. So yeah, and probably largely unnecessary for many communities. There's a mention, a guy asks, there's a mention of the spiritual communities being able to define the training criteria for their certified practitioners. Can you provide an example of what that training and certification might look like? Thank you, Guy. That is an excellent question. Very specific to the details of the proposal. So as Jonathan was mentioning, Jonathan Goldman earlier, I think that was in this conversation, although we've had a few now, and thank you. They're always really excellent. So thank you, Jonathan, for your wealth of experience you bring into these conversations. That you all use guardians, and your guardians go through an internal certification process. That when you decide that they're ready, that they are, you permit them to serve in a more kind of hands-on role to help oversee ceremony. So the proposal kind of, in some ways, it was inspired by that, and it gives communities their own kind of ability to certify community members as being able to work in peer support, which includes harm reduction, to try to drive down the facilitator-client ratio, and also to just provide more autonomy to communities. And so that I've tried to draft it flexibly in case this notion made the Oregon Health Authority very uncomfortable. They would have the option to impose some rules that could kind of drive that certification process. And the one that I think like it would make the most sense if the state were to do that, and I don't necessarily suggest that they should, is that they could say that before a community is going to certify a member to provide peer support, they could have to be involved with the community for a certain amount of time or number of ceremonies, that they could have some kind of minimum amount of relationship with the community before they start kind of serving in a leadership role. I don't think that would
So,
be
John, what you're talking
onerous
about,
if it were done.
what you're talking about is rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right?
Hmm.
That's what you're talking about. Look, and I made a joke earlier, but the truth is the ratio of helpers to participants is actually quite, we have lots of helpers in our ceremonies. We're about to do this weekend, we're about to do 3 ceremonies in a row, and we'll have 25 to 30 participants, and we will have somewhere around 8 to 10 staff. Because we have people who are musicians, and we have people who are leaders, and we have people who are called, as you said, guardians. We use an apprenticeship system, right? In other words, people who've been doing it for a while will take on people, and those people have a limited responsibility until they are assessed to be ready to then take on a more. And it works very well. And how long that takes, as I said to you, how long that takes depends on the person. You know, there are some people who have a facility and can get it quicker, and some people need time to become comfortable with how do you help someone who's going through someone? How do you non-intervene, but intervene, right? How do you hold the space? Well, it's a whole way that we do it. And as I said, it takes as much time as it takes. The assumption needs to be on the part of the people who are overseeing this is we are the ones that want to keep people safe. I want people to be safe much more, right? The people who are on the professional people on the board, what they want is that it doesn't blow back on them, right? That's what bureaucrats want. They don't blow it back on me. I want to make sure that I don't get in trouble. I want people to have a good experience. I want people to be safe. So of course we're going to train people who and not have them do stuff before they're ready. For them and also for the participants. You see, so we're reversing, and I think the essence of your proposal is we need to trust that the people who are doing this work are sincere, are deeply committed, and want what's best for everybody. Okay, so then how can the bureaucrats help that? And rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's? What do you need to know? So if you need to know that a person has participated in an X number of ceremonies, okay. Our criteria is, can the person do the multi-level multitasking that they need to do? Do they know how to hold a space while giving people space, but also, keeping them secure? It's a little more abstract, but it's a very grounded thing, because as I said, we want people to be safe, more just like the thing with the diversion as the government calls it, right? I don't want people I'm not going to be giving out my sacrament to people just to hang out and have fun, right? I have a greater interest in it, in both those things, than any government agency. And so the people who are given the responsibility of making those regulations, would be well served to really trust that as their assumption. Now let's talk about what works.
Thank you for that. And John, the first question that came in, I'm going to introduce this one. And Jyoti, this is for you to discuss. Prima Sagara put this one in about testing. So there's this really big discussion about should the government have its hands on sacrament in between production and ingestion or use. And this is a really complicated topic. And I would love to hear, Jyotima, your organization's opinion on this topic.
Yeah, well, Prema's our alchemist at Enlightened Life Temple and our vice president, and an experienced herbalist with lots of, knowledge of the biology and genetics of many different natural plants that are healing, including psilocybin. The most important thing is, we don't want our plants to be around unconscious energy. So anyone who grows our mushrooms, we believe they are living beings. We believe they are beings of consciousness that exist on the earth as sacred allies for us, for healing and for awakening. And so we would grow them according to our spiritual traditions, and we would attune them in specific ways throughout their growing process, so that we would have a variety of vibrational products at the end, that each one attuned to a different frequency or a different, we would call it a different state of consciousness that we might experience, because they're very absorbent. They take on the energy that's around them. And so we have very specific, deliberate methods that we use for those attunement processes while they're growing, and we use symbolism and ritual and chanting and all of that. Then when we bring them out to be prepared, you must be an experienced practitioner in order to handle them. And even for testing, we are talking about, setting up our own lab, so that our plants do not leave our energy field, and they're never thrown unconsciously in a bag and their bodies cut into without, proper ceremony and permission and communication with the plants. And I mean, to us, it would be like if we sent one of our members to a lab and they said, "Oh, we're just going to cut off a piece of your finger and, see what you're made of, or if you have any contamination." We wouldn't do that to these sacred members of our community, who are our medicine and our sacrament. So we have ways that we interact with them during that process, and to keep the frequency. And even if we have a member of our temple, but they don't have the practitioner training, or they haven't reached that particular level, we have sort of, a system of levels of initiation in our organization, then they wouldn't be allowed to be around the plants. At the same time, we want to grow them also in proximity to our ceremonial area because we want their presence. Even just to be in their presence, people have effects. Some people just put them under their pillow and they have effects. So they're very potent, especially the way we have, interacted with them from the beginning. And so the idea to send them out for testing is not plausible. It doesn't work for us. I mean, we just don't and then we buy them back from a center and we don't know what has happened to them. We're disconnected from them. So being able to grow our own psilocybin mushrooms, and we also would like to innovate and work with varying genetics and varying combinations to see if we can refine all of the essential elements that are in there besides the psilocin, that we haven't yet studied, that haven't been brought forward. So that's something we feel like we could do in a spiritual partnership with the plant, not that we would treat the plant as an object. So those are some of our concerns around testing. And I know that other entheogenic traditions have shared with us the same concerns. They don't, I think our testing and our growing and our ceremonial areas all need to be in-house. That's our position on that.
Beautiful.
That's
Thank you
incredible.
for that.
I was just gonna say that's incredible. And I think for as many communities that won't have the financial means to do their own testing, their only chance is to, possibly send them off to the lowest cost testing facility that they can do to keep their costs low. And
I want to tell you, today we had a meeting and Prema was saying, if we do invest in making a sacred lab to do the testing in a sacred way, then we would offer that service, and any other practitioners that might like to have a product to offer the public could be assured that, our laboratory testing processes would be in harmony with the sacredness of the plants, for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, so let's see, we've got more questions.
Pick a winner here. And we're not going to be able to get to all of these tonight. John and I will discuss how to get them all answered though later.
And before we get to another question, I just want to quickly give a plug. A group of us in Oregon has tentatively formed an organization called the Theogenic Practitioners Council of Oregon. It's a place, since there's so many Oregonians on this call, a place for folks to come together and talk about these things. And there's probably, more power that we have as people when we come together. And, we think that just educating on these issues is just really critically needed right now. And so we think the time is short, but it's a good time to kind of move forward in promoting this in Oregon. And I've been approached by a number of other people who want to be a part of it, who don't live or practice in Oregon. And we're trying to keep this a local organization, a local effort, because we think there's integrity in local organizations. There can be integrity in any organization, but that there's something special about just keeping it to Oregon, where it's our community that's kind of advocating along on Oregon law. So Joe, do you have a final question that you thought was important to, or does yeah.
I don't. I'll pick one though. Probably the first one. So from Dancing on Clips. So 109 doesn't allow cannabis use along with psilocybin. Can John, your proposal be used as a gateway towards dual use? There was a recent study referenced here from Imperial College London. Majority of the times I've used psilocybin mushrooms, I've also used cannabis. And I don't know, I'll let you take that or anybody else.
Yeah, so under the measure, a facilitator is not allowed to participate in a person taking psilocybin if they are visibly intoxicated, I think is the wording of the measure. And of course, visibly intoxicated isn't defined, but I presume that it will ultimately mean if a person already appears to be under the influence of alcohol, cannabis, or controlled substance, that they will, that the law itself, which is again not the regulations, it's the law, that regulations can't, that's one of these pillars of non-negotiables that we can't work around, would likely say that they're not allowed. I think that might just be a little, like the hard thing about these, advocating for something is it has to be something that's still palatable and that doesn't make people too uncomfortable. And honestly, politically, I don't know if we're yet to the point. I mean, I would love it if we were, but I'm not sure if we were to advocate for that, how Oregon. I definitely encourage you to comment on it, because I think it is important. I think we'll get there eventually, but I just think it's not even at the federal level has there been a multi-sacrament church that's been kind of that where a courts upheld the right for the church to use multiple, like in theogenic sacraments. So that it's like the current legal thinking just hasn't evolved to cover that yet. Although I know there's people who are kind of planning up lawsuits to file to try to test that. And I think they'll ultimately be successful. But unfortunately, given the parameters of the measure, I don't think there's really a pathway for that within the context of Measure 109. So until we get a legislative change somehow or a statute change, I think we're probably limited just to psilocybin.
Well, thank you, John. And maybe if people feel like they have time, just a quick reference to your organization, any links you want to put out, and we can go from there. Jyotima, can we start with you? Like, where can people find information about your work and organization?
I'm going to give you a couple of links here in the chat box. My nonprofit organization is called Enlightened Life Temple, and it's at enlightenedlife.org. Enlightened, like it already happened, right? And you can read about my spiritual journey and the development of our temple and how it was founded. And you won't find on that site, I'll put it in there too, any information about our psychedelic practice. Those things are reserved for our members and for our initiates. And it hasn't been a good idea to put any of that out there in the public arena all these years. And I'm still not sure that I will put our nonprofit out there, under this proposal. I have some concerns on the nonprofit piece of it, just because of, the IRS is so difficult and we've had that protection for so long. And I don't want to put 28 years of work at risk. And so, I'm contemplating and talking to various people about that right now. Our Linktree address is there. It's under Nexus Awareness. That's links to all important articles. Some of the research that I talked about, the links are there. For Mahashivaratri, there's the Shiva Tandava Stotram, which is an amazing psychedelic video with the singing of the traditional Shiva Stotram for Mahashivaratri. So I've enjoyed that if you go there. And then there's links to all of the various meetings and things that I'm offering now as I get ready to move toward figuring out how to open something or offer something when the program comes online. We have a very active meetup group. If you just look for Nexus Center for Consciousness, there's a lot of different stuff going on there. And yeah, I want to mention one of our meetups coming up in March on the 18th, I think it is. It is Oregon Psilocybin Mentoring Group. So anyone who mentors people or coaches people or facilitates or helps, you're welcome to join. And we're going to try to create some community support for the new people that want to get involved so that we have some voices of wisdom for them. Thanks.
Thank you. How about you, Nicole? Could you go next?
Sure. So I'm going to put in the chat, check out northstar.guide. Anyone who is purporting to form any sort of business endeavor in psychedelics, please go to northstar.guide and get involved there. The other is the Psychedelic Bar Association at the psychedelicbar.org. And what I want to say about that is if you are a lawyer, you should ask yourself why you are not yet a psychedelic lawyer. And if you are a client, ask your lawyer, are you a member of the Psychedelic Bar Association? Because here, I'm putting this in the chat. I will, when I figure out how to do it, is that we're in the middle of getting our website up, so I can't just point you to where it is, but this is basically our invitation to lawyers based on the North Star Pledge. So I'll put that in the chat, and thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely and nice to be in community with all of you here on the screen and listening. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Pilar?
Thank you also for this invitation, and I just hope we continue to plant seeds and grow this movement for religious and spiritual freedom and protect it.
Thank you very much for being here and playing a part. The Reverend Hunt Priest. It's the first time I saw that title. I love it.
That's a mouthful. So Hunt Priest, the organization is Ligare. Again, the root word for to bind or unite and religion, ligare.org. My email address is hunt@ligare.org. We have members in Canada, the US, Mexico, and in Europe. So we're building a network, we're educating, preparing for legal and safe opportunities for all people to have access to these sacred plants. Really an honor to be here with you all.
Thank you, Hunt. And Jonathan?
So we have now entered the 21st century. I'm happy to say. We do have a website, which I think has been up for like 2 weeks. Because right in the daimyo world, we don't proselytize, but the people want to find us. We do have a website. It's chlq.org, Church of the Holy Light of the Queen.org. And it is actually functioning, as are we. We managed to find a way to function actually through the whole pandemic. So we are open, and we're very limited in how we're taking new people, and we're being very judicious about how we go about that, just based on health things.
Beautiful.
Coming, right? And I am very grateful. I'm very grateful for this circle. I've learned a lot, which I like doing very much, and I have lots of respect for what everybody's doing. It's right. Freedom is good. Freedom is good. And so those of us who are here are participating in the liberation of humanity in our own little ways, right? And as I say very often, what we're doing ain't much, but it ain't nothing. So I'm very honored. I'm honored to be among you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pilar?
Sorry, last minute. I just want to share that I am a part of leading and organizing 2 different training programs. One is a more traditional program from my institution, Lewis and Clark College, Grad School Continuing Education. And also with my colleagues, we're creating a program for everybody, not only for therapists. And this is called Earth Medicine Center. And we will have a website up very soon.
Beautiful. Thank you for letting us know, and I hope to learn more about that. So, John, thank you very much for putting this all together. This has been amazing. These videos will go live on YouTube soon. Somehow the recording broke, so I'll have to do some real fixing. So the first half and the second half will be on YouTube separately, but sooner than later there'll be one video, so stay tuned. Please share. Please get active politically in Oregon and elsewhere. The fact that people are still going to prison for practicing their religion is unbelievable, or at least putting themselves at risk. So please do get loud, get active. John, any closing thoughts or remarks?
I just want to say thank you, Joe, again, and to Psychedelics a Day for creating the forum and the space to have these conversations. I just think they're so critically important, and we need to be having more of them. And I hope folks, and thank you everyone who came today, both on the panel and also in the public. This is just such an important conversation, and I hope people will share this and continue these conversations. And like you said, Joe, get loud, speak out. I mean, there's 2 meetings coming up this week where Oregon will be considering whether to do this, and so they reserve time to hear from the public. So if people don't show up and we don't get it, then it's really up to us to demand it and to show that this is important to the people of Oregon. So please do everyone do their part, whatever that means. It looks like different things, but if this matters to you, I encourage everyone to weigh in this week.
All right, everybody, until next time, you'll see John and I in 2 weeks. Thank you all panelists for being here, and thank you all for watching. Have a beautiful rest of your night. Bye-bye.